Have you ever heard of backwards mixing or top-down mixing? I've talked about backwards mixing before, and I'm a firm believer, or at least I was, in that idea of starting at the end of the mix with the master fader mix bus, then the subgroup buses before you ever get to the individual tracks. As a concept and a theory, love it. But I started wondering lately, maybe I'm wrong. What if I'm making it harder on myself by putting some EQ and compression on my drum bus without first EQing and compressing the kick drum and the snare drum? Maybe I'm wrong. Well, in this video, I'm going to show you why I don't think I'm wrong, because I tried it forwards, didn't love the results, switched to backwards, and it worked great. Let me show you. Okay, what's this crazy gringo talking about? Backwards mixing is this idea that I've got all these tracks over here. So from here to here, these are my tracks in the session. And then over here, I've got buses for the individual components or groups. So drums, bass, electrics, vocals, background vocals on this particular mix. And then I've got a bunch of different effects that I may or may not use on the mix. These are a part of my template. So all my audio tracks are routed to one of these buses here. Each of these buses is then routed to my master bus here. Master fader, as the Pro Tools folk like to call it. So the idea of backwards mixing is, instead of coming over here and starting my mix by working on my kick drum track, I actually start on my drum bus. Or actually, more accurately, I start over here on my mix bus. So the idea is I set levels, there are no plugins in the session, I add plugins to my mix bus first and dial those in. So some mix bus compression, some EQ, maybe a multi-band compressor if you want to go crazy. And from there, once I've dialed that sound in, then I go backwards and start working on my buses and try to get the sound I want in the least amount of moves. Meaning, if I can make my kick and snare sound better by just the EQ settings that I choose on the drum bus, then that's a win. I then don't have to do any or as much work on the individual tracks themselves. Like I said, it all sounds good in theory, but does it sound good? Well, let's find out. I actually started a mix. This is a song we're mixing over for Dueling Mixes. And I started the mix and went through more of a forwards approach. So I had nothing on my mix bus, nothing on the subgroups. I just went in and started EQing the kick, and then the snare, and then the overheads, and then the room, and then back to the kick, back to the snare, back to the overheads, back to the rooms, around and around we go, trying to get a good sound. Then I repeated that for the bass, repeated that for the guitars. So here's an instrumental mix of where I was after that work. So maybe an hour's worth of work, and I thought it was sounding okay, but not great. Here's what that sounded like. So it's kind of meh, like it's okay, whatever. What I then decided to do was to start over from scratch. So I saved a copy of that mix, right? And started again, removed all the plugins, brought all the faders down, and started over. And what I ended up doing the second time around was, let me get back to the backwards mixing thing. Let me start on the master fader and put some plugins there, and then let me put some on the groups, and then if I need to, let me put some on the individual channels. And the end result, to my ears, you may disagree, sounds way better and way more like a mix. The mix isn't finished, and I gotta argue, the mix isn't finished yet, and to be completely fair, I've spent more time on this mix than the one before, but this one got there much easier because I started at the end and worked my way back. So here's what the backwards version of this mix sounds like. To me, that sounds much more like an actual mix when you compare it to the first round. Particularly the kick and the snare. I was having a lot of problems in that forwards mix of using tons of EQ and compression to get the kick and snare to sound right, and they still didn't sound right. Listen to them here. The kick is like very foom, 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 doesn't have any low end and any like meat to it, and the snare is obviously too loud, but it also doesn't have a great tone to it. The kick especially is just awful. Flip over to this one, same tracks, no samples were used, but I was able to get a better sound out of both kick and snare. The kick has some snap to it and it has some beef down in the low end. So am I telling you that you're doing it wrong if you start with the individual tracks and work your way down? No. Am I saying that backwards mixing is the best approach for every song and every genre? No. But this was a good affirmation for me that it just worked better going backwards than going forwards on this particular mix, and I found that to be true on a lot of mixes that I do. When I get the end processing in place, the earlier stuff just seems to fall into place a lot more easily. Now, is it possible to fight yourself? Is it possible to make bad decisions on the main mix bus that then make all your other decisions moot because you made some bad choices here? Absolutely. As with anything, you've got to get good at this approach. Everything you do on the mix bus has a lot more weight to it than what you do on the hi-hat track. But if you do it right and you develop an ear for how to make that mix bus processing sound great and improve the overall mix, you end up having to work less on the individual tracks and things seem to just glue together better. So if you've never tried this approach, I encourage you to try it. It's not going to always work. You may try it and your mix sounds awful and you'll be raising your fist at the sky, cursing the name of Joe Gilder, but you may also find that it works really well. And if you give it some practice and work on changing your approach, you might find this is more enjoyable and you get better results. And that's kind of a win-win. So thanks so much for watching this video. If you want to mix this song, this is a song we'll be mixing next month over at Dueling Mixes. You can try Dueling Mixes for free. No strings attached. It's not one of those you pay and then ask for a refund. You literally just fill out a form and you get in for free for, I believe it's 2 weeks right now. So if you want to try a free 2-week trial of Dueling Mixes, head over to duelingmixes.com and check it out. We're mixing songs like this and lots of other great tracks that will make your mixes better. All right, that's it for me. See you next time.